Hey y'all, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're not, welcome back to Arcana X Major. Today we are starting a new series. It's kind of like a podcast, except also I'm drawing the subject of today's video. If you want to see more about my process, you can take a look at my Patreon, which is linked in the description. It's Siege, by the way, if you couldn't tell, because I'm not on camera. It's just my voice. Oh, okay, anyway. So we're gonna get on to today's topic. You might recognize him. In November of 1966, in Clendenin, West Virginia, a group of gravediggers in the cemetery see a large, brown, winged creature take flight from the trees nearby. This would become the first reported sighting of the beloved American cryptid known as Mothman. Just a few days later, Roger Scarberry was out driving along with his wife Linda, accompanied by Steve and Mary Millette. They had taken Roger's 57 Chevy Bel Air a few miles outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in what is now known as the McClintock Wildlife Management Area, a wildlife sanctuary. The locals refer to this place as the TNT area, as it houses multiple abandoned concrete bunkers that were used for manufacturing munitions during World War II. As the group of couples pulled the car over to hang out, Roger reportedly felt that something was off, but couldn't really explain why. Roger kept this to himself, but as they approached a gated area around the TNT factory, they noticed glowing red lights, which began to move around. As the lights came closer towards them, they realized they weren't lights at all, but the glowing red eyes of a large humanoid. The couples got back into the car and drove away. The creature reportedly kept pace with them, even as they reached speeds of 100 miles an hour. The creature chased them all the way to the city limits of Point Pleasant. Roger claims that as he looked in the rearview mirror, all he could see was the shadow of the humanoid and its glowing red eyes. Marcella Bennett, that same night when leaving her friend's house, reported seeing a large gray creature with bat-like wings and glowing red eyes. She was so scared that she dropped her infant child on the ground and fell on top of it, paralyzed with fear. She stayed there, aware of what was happening as the creature gazed upon her, but found herself completely unable to move and felt as if time was moving in slow motion. Marcella was eventually able to run back inside of her friend's home with her child, who was fine, by the way, and informed her friends of what had happened. While on the phone with the police, Marcella and company heard a loud noise on the porch, and sure enough, there was the dark looming figure with its signature glowing eyes. Newell Partridge, in a town not far from Point Pleasant, claimed that he saw strange patterns in his television set and a strange noise outside of his house. He shined a flashlight into his yard, and the beam landed on a large creature with eyes that glowed like bicycle reflectors. Partridge's German Shepherd disappeared following this sighting, and many believe the Mothman may have been to blame. Eyewitness accounts all state that Mothman is a man-like creature and walks clumsily on its two hind legs. It's estimated to be somewhere between 6 and 8 feet tall, with a massive 10-foot wingspan. Its head is oddly shaped and sits very close to its body. I took some artistic liberties here, okay? Some have described the creature as being completely headless. Every witness mentioned the glowing red eyes. Those who have seen Mothman take flight all agree that the creature hovers with wings outstretched rather than flapping like a bird. Though many people believe that Mothman might actually be a sandhill crane, a large bird with characteristic red patches around the eyes. Personally, I have found reports that support this, stating that sandhill cranes have been spotted in West Virginia for years, and also refute this, saying that cranes aren't found at all in this area. Maybe sound off in the comments below if you live near Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Birds' eyes tend to have a red appearance at night when hit with a light, due to the vascular membranes that show through the retina. This is referred to as eye shine. Owls, with barn owls in particular, have eye shine more red than others. But with all of these hunters and fishermen having seen Mothman, surely it couldn't have just been a bird. I mean, come on, that's kind of ridiculous. About a year after the Scarberry and Millette sighting, on December 15th, 1967, there was heavy traffic along the Silver Bridge, which spanned from West Virginia to Ohio. A single eye bar near the top of the bridge cracked, and the Silver Bridge collapsed, plunging cars and pedestrians into the Ohio River below. In this tragedy, 46 people died, and this accident resulted in the passing of the National Bridge and Inspection Standards in 1968. But what does all of this have to do with Mothman? Several phone calls to the police the same day claimed to have seen Mothman on the Silver Bridge before its collapse. Was this the beginning of the thought that Mothman is a harbinger of doom and warns of impending disasters? After this incident, Mothman sightings came to a halt, leading some people to believe that the humanoid may have been an angel meant to warn us of the bridge's collapse. This theory was highlighted in the 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. Keel researched the Mothman phenomenon during the months prior to this disaster and believed supernatural forces were at work in the area of Point Pleasant. This book would go on to explore more in depth what happened to those to have a run-in with Mothman. Those who have laid eyes upon Mothman often show signs of psychological distress, anxiety, nightmares, and even prophetic visions, including having seen the Silver Bridge collapse before it happened. Many report suffering from an ailment known as Klieg conjunctivitis, or red, swollen, and itchy eyes for weeks after seeing Mothman. Others have suffered from full-blown sunburns after coming into contact with the gaze of the cryptid's glowing red eyes. And some report being harassed by men in black who threaten them not to come forward with their experiences. So, let's get into some more theories. First, we have the curse of Chief Cornstalk, a leader of the Shawnee Nation prior to the American Revolution. He opposed European settlement west of the Ohio River in his youth and became an advocate for peace after the Battle of Point Pleasant in 1774. Sadly, he was murdered during a diplomatic visit to Fort Randolph in 1777. Cornstalk's killers were brought to trial at the insistence of Patrick Henry, who was governor of Virginia at the time, but fellow soldiers refused to testify, so all involved were acquitted. And I highly recommend reading over Chief Cornstalk's history, as there's a lot of really interesting stuff that I'm unfortunately just going to skip over since it doesn't really involve Mothman. In 1921, a play was written based on the history of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. In this play, Cornstalk says, "I came to the fort as your friend, and you murdered me. You have murdered by my side my young son. For this, may the curse of the Great Spirit rest upon this land, May it be blighted by nature. May it even be blighted in its hopes. May the strength of its people be paralyzed by the stain of our blood. All that said, a man who was ambushed and shot multiple times at point-blank range most likely didn't have time for such a dramatic statement, and this theory has been debunked several times over. I mean, it is kind of the cliche, Indian burial ground sort of thing, but I personally think it's kind of fun. Next up, we have the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Beginning in April of 1986, a rumor tore through the ranks of what was then a little-known nuclear power plant located in the southern tier of the Ukraine, Chernobyl. In the days preceding the tragic meltdown, 4 Chernobyl employees had reported seeing what they claimed was a large, dark, headless man with gigantic wings and fire-red eyes. Researchers now believe that the accounts surrounding this creature are similar to what investigators now recognize to be an archetypal Mothman event. Much like the Point Pleasant Mothman witnesses, these Chernobyl employees began to share unsettling and strangely similar experiences. Some had been having horrifying nightmares, while others received threatening phone calls. According to accounts, some of these employees even mentioned their bizarre experiences to their superiors at the facility, but without evidence or any clear-cut indication of what the problem may be, there was very little these officials could do, even had they been willing to take action. On April 26, 1986, during a routine test of Reactor 4, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was rocked by a massive explosion. 30 people died that morning, followed by 10 additional deaths due to radiation exposure. Over the next 9 days, the graphite of the reactor continued to burn, resulting in tremendous environmental damage and an untold number of radiation casualties over the next 17 years. As the Soviet helicopters circled the smoldering plant, dropping over 500 pounds of clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals on top of the flames, some of the surviving workers who, at the sacrifice of their own lives, heroically struggled to prevent any further destruction, claimed to have witnessed what has been described as a 20-foot bird gliding through the undulating tentacles of irradiated smoke, which continued to spew from the reactor. Another instance of Mothman predicting catastrophic events to come. Allegedly, a creature with glowing red eyes was seen in the Ukraine in the weeks leading up to the April 26, 1986 disaster. There is no solid evidence or news reports that exist supporting this claim, though it does pop up in the Mothman Prophecies, with Alexander Leek reading out. In ancient cultures, the moth represents a form of the psyche, or the soul immortally trapped in the hellish death realms. Then he says, Mothman. Well, that's what the Ukrainians called him. Rough translation, of course. There were 100 sightings in Chernobyl the year the nuclear pump went down. Galveston, 1969, just before the hurricane, they saw it. But seeing isn't always believing. In actuality, there were no reported Mothman sightings in that area of the Ukraine before the Chernobyl disaster, or before the Galveston hurricanes, which occurred in 1900 and 1915, not in 1969. The scene was entirely made up by the screenplay writer for the film. The exact origin of the Blackbird of Chernobyl story is unknown, but the oldest posts of it on the internet seem to trace back to 2005. And this story was fully debunked in 2007 by researcher Lauren Coleman, who was a consultant on the Mothman Prophecies movie of 2002. He stated, quote, "There are no records of Mothman at Chernobyl or Galveston. before any earthquakes. Since Mothman encounters did not happen in those locations, such unfortunate tales are ones that both John Keel and I tried to remove them from people's mental databases as soon as the movie and documentary noted them in 2002. In 2008, in a post titled Galveston Mothman, he insisted, quote, "This is poor myth-making. The famed big hurricanes in Galveston occurred in 1900 and 1915, long before the Houston Batman was seen in 1953. The movie also tries to link Chernobyl's nuclear meltdown with precursor sightings of Mothman. Not true. There were no sightings. It was all made up for the movie. Time to move on from these fictionalized additions to the Mothman story that keep distracting researchers from any real investigations of the Point Pleasant phenomena, whatever that might be." End quote. He repeated this yet again in April of 2011 with the post, quote, "Yes, Chernobyl's 25th anniversary, but no Mothman was seen," end quote. In 2002, researcher Micah Hanks wrote an article for Mysterious Universe listing the supposed Mothman Chernobyl sighting as a misconception within Mothman mythology. Despite the rigorous debunking, the Blackbird of Chernobyl was featured on paranormal websites like American Monsters. And that whole story that I read you at the beginning of this segment, that was a creepypasta. The whole Blackbird of Chernobyl seems like it may have just become a creepypasta, and there's two different versions. I read you one version of it. It's a creepypasta. Get you baited. In the book Lake Michigan Mothman, Tobias Weyland quotes Lauren Coleman as saying, "The tragedy at Silver Bridge is, to date, the only recorded disaster to be associated with Mothman, wherein the creature was sighted prior to the unfortunate event. Although folkloric account exists saying that Mothman was present at many historical disasters, according to Lauren Coleman, these later stories are based on events taken from fictional sources." I personally find the idea of Mothman being a harbinger of doom interesting because it's easily found that most of the events that he was said to have predicted actually didn't happen. As in, there were no actual Mothman sightings. There was no sighting at Chernobyl, there was no sighting at Galveston, and really the only place that eyewitness account has been made that he was seen before a disaster was at the Silver Bridge. Maybe that's what he was here to tell us about. But still, it exists within the Mothman community that he is some sort of angel of death, even though there's really not a ton of evidence to support that claim. Rarely, Mothman is sighted outside of West Virginia, though most notably there was a slew of Mothman sightings in Chicago beginning in April of 2017. An anonymous person reported to the UFO Clearinghouse website under the title "Flying Entity, Possible Mothman Sighting Seen in Chicago, Illinois." This group of sightings was given the name the Chicago Phantom rather than being called the Mothman, and Lon Strickler, paranormal blogger, put together 59 alleged sighting locations around the Chicago area, but came to the conclusion that the sightings were inaccurate, inconsistent, or most likely hoaxes. While new publications referred to this case as the Chicago Mothman, the sightings may not have held a significant connection to the West Virginia Mothman, and the events led up to the release of the Mothman of Point Pleasant documentary, so some believe it may have been a publicity stunt. The Chicago 2017 sightings are seemingly disputed among Mothman enthusiasts. Some find the similarities and wording of eyewitness accounts to be too frivolous to be true, and others find it unlikely that 59 people would all have the same details to the same story. Personally, I'm just going to go on record saying that I think it was Mothman, and you cannot convince me otherwise. In The Lake Michigan Mothman by Tobias Weyland, Tobias and Emily Weyland cataloged winged humanoid sightings beyond 2017 and expanded the area to include not just Illinois, but also Missouri, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They also expanded the time frame to include not just 2017, but from the late 60s till present day. Tobias, in his writings, has held to the idea that these sightings were of a Lake Michigan Mothman, or at least in some way related to the classic 66-67 case. He received alleged sightings, interviewed supposed witnesses, and traveled to reported sighting locations. Despite criticism, he continued to investigate the case and was convinced in the possibility that winged beings, in whatever form, were lurking about and flying in the Lake Michigan area. Being a native of this area myself, I just wanted to give a shout out to Weyland and his book, which I highly recommend. If you're interested in keeping up with sightings of Mothman and other paranormal events, you can check out the Singular Fortean Society, which was set up by Weyland and has a timeline of recent Mothman events and other paranormal stuff in the Lake Michigan area specifically, with the most recent sighting being in July of 2020, though according to the website, that is still unverified. The sighting came from an air traffic controller and wouldn't be the first time that Mothman has been said to have been hanging around the Chicago O'Hare Airport. There haven't really been any recent sightings of Mothman in his original domain of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, though some possibly photoshopped images came out in 2016 from a resident of the town. Through the research I've put out here today, we may not be realistically any closer to the truth of who or what Mothman is, but we did go over some good debunking, and one thing is for certain. Whatever Mothman is, people love him. Maybe not those who have seen him in real life and gotten pink eye and nightmares, but us weirdos in our computer chairs certainly do. And there is good news for Mothman enthusiasts. Point Pleasant hosts a Mothman festival that should hopefully still be on for September 18th in 2021, where it will be celebrating its 20th year. There's cosplay, Mothman-themed food, souvenirs, bus tours of the TNT area, and maybe, if you're lucky, or unlucky, depending on your point of view, you'll get a glimpse of the notorious Mothman himself. And before the end of the video, I want to share my favorite piece of Mothman lore. Some people consider the Mothman legend to be associated with the number 13. Here's a bunch of examples. The original Point Pleasant, West Virginia Mothman reports started in November 1966 and ended in December 1967 with the collapse of the Silver Bridge. This makes it a 13-month period between the events. The Silver Bridge collapsed because of the faulty 13th steel pin in the eye bar. The name Point Pleasant has 13 letters in it. The most polluted pond in the TNT area where the majority of sightings took place was pond number 13. The men in black were reported to have been harassing witnesses and telling them not to talk about Mothman. The phrase, the men in black, has 13 letters in it. The name, Mothman Museum, has 13 letters in it. The maiden name of the Mothman witness, Linda Scarberry, is Linda McDaniel, which contains 13 letters. Linda Scarberry claimed to have seen the Mothman on her roof when she lived on 13th Street. The name of the Mothman witness, Steve Millette, has 13 letters in it. The name of Mothman witness, Kenneth Duncan, has 13 letters in it. The name of Mothman witness, Mabel McDaniel, 13 letters in it. The name of Mothman witness, Caitlin Beaver, has 13 letters in it. Faye DeWitt Laporte is said to have had her encounter with the Mothman at age 13. Both the phrase West Virginian and the Ohio Valley have 13 letters in them. And here's what I really want to know. Has anyone tried using a really big lamp?